I don't remember the exact moment the shift began, only that it came quietly, like a chill slipping under the door before a storm. One minute I was folding a shirt, a blue one, soft and worn, the kind my son used to love, and the next I was standing in the hallway, surrounded by people who looked at me like I was no longer human. Dana was shouting, her voice sharp, furious, accusing. Her robe hung loose over one shoulder, and in her hand was a stack of papers she didn't let me see. I couldn't follow her words at first, they seemed to bleed together until one line cut through everything. "You've ruined our lives." I looked to Thomas, my only son. He didn't speak. His arms were crossed and his eyes were on the floor. For a long time, I used to think silence was a neutral act. That choosing not to speak meant you were choosing peace. But standing there with my heart pounding in my chest and no one to meet my gaze, I finally understood. Silence in moments like that is violence too. My granddaughter, Maddie, picked up a slipper from the floor and threw it against the wall behind me. I didn't flinch. I couldn't. I was frozen in place, my hands still holding that blue shirt like it might somehow protect me. Her younger brother, Levi, stood further down the hallway, half hidden in shadow. He didn't say a word. His earbuds hung around his neck. He just watched. They didn't explain what I'd done right away. They didn't care if I understood. It was enough that I'd made a mistake, or at least that's what they'd decided. Eventually, Dana hissed something about a phone call, about a conversation with someone from the clinic. I'd said too much, apparently. Revealed something I wasn't supposed to. At first, I couldn't remember what she meant. I hadn't spoken to anyone about them, hadn't shared anything personal, hadn't even left the house. Then it came back to me. A week earlier, I'd taken a routine call from a woman at the clinic, just a follow-up about my medication. She'd asked about household income, who lived in the home, those kinds of questions, and I'd answered without thinking. I mentioned that Thomas sometimes picked up small side jobs, nothing major, just a few cash gigs here and there to help with bills. I didn't think twice about it, but for them, that was enough. Thomas was on disability, and those small jobs, if reported, could jeopardize the benefits they depended on. I didn't know. I hadn't meant to cause trouble. It was just something I said absent-mindedly, honestly. But honesty is dangerous when people live behind fragile walls. And now that one line, spoken without malice, had become the reason they turned on me. Dana stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. She said everything they'd built was gone now because I couldn't keep my mouth shut. When I asked what I was being punished for, her sister Simone, who had somehow made herself at home in our home over the years, crossed her arms and smirked. She said I should have known better, that I always played innocent and then acted surprised when things fell apart. I looked at Thomas again. He still wouldn't meet my gaze. No one stopped the attack. No one suggested we talk. The decision had already been made. I wasn't staying in that house another night, so I turned away. I walked back to the room they called the guest room, though it was never truly mine. It didn't have a window. Just a low vent that made strange rattling sounds at night. My things were stacked in plastic bins under the bed because the closet was full of Dana's winter coats and Maddie's extra shoes. I had one drawer in the dresser, the bottom one. I folded the shirt I had been holding and placed it gently on top of my small pile. Then I started packing. I didn't take much. A few changes of clothes, my blood pressure pills, a coat, my photo album. I left behind anything that couldn't fit. There was no point in bringing pieces of a life that had never truly included me. They didn't stop talking in the kitchen. Their voices rose and fell like waves crashing against each other, but no one came down the hallway. No one knocked on the door. I moved quietly, slowly. I wasn't rushing. I wasn't afraid. I was just done. When I stepped out of the room, Levi was still in the hallway, still quiet, still watching. I paused for a moment, unsure of what to say. I'd helped raise him, made him oatmeal on school mornings, sat through his guitar practice when no one else had the patience. And now he stood there like a statue, holding a bottle of water he hadn't opened. "I'm leaving," I said softly. He didn't ask where I'd go, he didn't ask why, he just nodded once. I walked past him, down the same hallway I had cleaned 1,000 times, past the kitchen where Dana and Simone were still talking like I no longer existed, past the living room where Thomas sat watching TV, unmoving. I opened the front door. Cold air hit my face. It was sharp and wet. I didn't look back. I didn't slam the door. I didn't say goodbye, and I didn't expect to come back. The studio I found was small, but I liked the sound the door made when it clicked shut, like a soft promise. The walls were cracked and the floor creaked. The mattress was thin and dipped in the middle, but no one yelled through the walls. No one demanded silence in the morning. No one rolled their eyes when I entered the room. I bought my own groceries, tea, bread, peanut butter, oatmeal. I listened to the neighbors argue about bills and lottery tickets. I taped a note above the kitchen sink that simply said, "Breathe." The first week I wasn't lonely. I was tired, but it was the kind of tired that feels clean. That second week, though, the silence began to twist itself into doubt. I kept looking at my phone, almost hoping for a message from Levi, just a small sign that someone still remembered I existed. And then one morning the calls came, first from Thomas, then Dana, then Maddie, over and over, voicemails. Missed calls, unknown numbers, I didn't answer. Not because I didn't care, but because I knew deep down they weren't calling to apologize. They were calling because something had happened. And when I finally opened one of the messages from Thomas, it confirmed what I already suspected. Levi was gone. I didn't call back right away. My hands were trembling and my breath wouldn't settle in my chest. I stared at the phone, at the names lighting up one after another, Thomas, Dana, even Maddie. It had been a month, 30 days without a word from any of them. And now, suddenly, I was the center of their attention again. Not because they missed me, not because they regretted how they'd treated me, but because they needed something they couldn't fix themselves. I listened to one voicemail. It was Maddie's voice, but this time it wasn't sharp or mocking. It was raw, unsteady. "Grandma, please, it's Levi, he's missing. We don't know where he went. Just call if you hear anything, please." Her voice cracked on that last word. For a second I couldn't breathe. Missing, gone. The images that flashed in my mind were too fast, too dark, too real. I imagined him on a bus, on the street, in the cold, alone, afraid. I thought of the way he'd looked at me that last night, like he'd known what was coming. And I hated myself for not reaching out sooner, for giving them the benefit of the doubt, for assuming he'd be safe just because he hadn't been cruel. I didn't answer the next call or the one after that. Not because I didn't care, but because I couldn't think clearly. My whole body felt tight with panic, but even beneath the fear, something else started to take shape. A quiet knowing, a voice I hadn't listened to in years. This wasn't an accident. I called his school, asked to speak to someone who might know anything about Levi. They transferred me to the counselor, Miss Reed, a woman I'd met once during a parent-teacher night years ago. She remembered me, and when I asked if she'd heard anything, she paused before answering. Her voice dropped, softer, almost hesitant. She told me that Levi had been having a hard time lately, that he talked about me often, that he'd mentioned wanting to live with me. Then she said something that made my stomach drop. Last week, Levi had gotten into an argument with Maddie. He defended me, and she'd called him a traitor. Told him he was pathetic for still caring about the parasite. Then she kicked him out of her room and told him to go live with his precious grandma if he loved her so much. Dana didn't intervene. Simone laughed. And Thomas, as always, said nothing. I sat in silence after the call ended, phone limp in my hand. So this was what they hadn't said in the voicemails. This was the part they'd left out. Levi didn't run away. He was pushed. Not physically, maybe, but emotionally, spiritually, completely. He had seen too much, said too much, chosen the wrong side. And now he was gone, and they were trying to make it my fault. The next call was from Thomas. I answered. He sounded tired, not broken, just worn down, like someone who had run out of lies but still didn't know how to tell the truth. He said Levi hadn't taken his phone, that he'd left a note, but it didn't say much. Just that he needed space, that he was going where it was quiet, that he couldn't breathe in that house anymore. I didn't say anything right away, just listened to the silence on the other end. And then I asked, "Why are you calling me?" He hesitated, then said, "Because he still trusts you. You're the only one he talks about like he still believes you care." Those words landed like a stone in water, sending ripples through everything I'd been holding back. I didn't tell him what the counselor said. I didn't tell him that I already knew what had happened. I didn't ask why he hadn't stood up for his son, just like he hadn't stood up for me. I said only this: "If I hear from him, I'll let you know." And then I hung up. That night I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of the nail salon downstairs closing for the night. I thought about Levi. About where he might be, if he was cold, if he had eaten. I couldn't stop seeing his face, the way he looked when he was younger, soft and shy and always watching. He had never asked for much. and yet they still found a way to make him too much. The next morning, my phone rang again. Unknown number, no voicemail, just one ring, then silence. I stared at it for a moment, then hit redial. A boy answered. His voice was unsure. I asked if Levi was there. There was a pause, then shuffling, then a quiet voice. Grandma. It was him, Levi. His voice was small, like he hadn't spoken in hours. I sat down without realizing it, knees giving out beneath me. I asked if he was safe. He said yes, that he was with his friend Malik, who let him crash for a few nights, that he hadn't wanted to go back to school because he was afraid they'd call home. I asked if he needed anything. He said just one thing, "Can I come to you?" I didn't hesitate. "Of course," I said, "right now, any time." He sent me the address. I grabbed my coat and my bag and left without thinking. The bus ride felt endless. I checked my phone every 5 minutes, afraid he'd change his mind. That someone would find him first. That he'd disappear again. But when I arrived, he was there, sitting on the curb with his hoodie pulled over his head and his bag at his feet. When he saw me, he stood up slowly, like he wasn't sure if it was real. Then he hugged me, not a polite hug, not an awkward teenage hug, a real one. The kind that says, "I've been waiting for someone to make me feel safe again." We didn't talk much on the way home. He kept his hood up. I didn't push. When we got inside, he looked around the tiny apartment and whispered, "This already feels better." I made him tea. He sat on the bed without saying a word. He didn't ask about the others. He didn't say their names. He just unpacked, folded his clothes neatly, and placed his phone face down on the nightstand, like he didn't want the world behind him to follow him here. That night, he slept soundly. And I sat in the chair beside the window, watching the soft glow of a streetlight flicker on the pavement, knowing something had shifted, not just for him, but for me too. This wasn't just about protecting Levi. It was about becoming the kind of woman who finally stopped apologizing for being the one who noticed the fire before everything burned. 2 days passed before they came. I had just finished making scrambled eggs when there was a knock at the door. Sharp, fast, too urgent to be casual. I didn't need to look through the peephole to know who it was. I felt it in my chest before I saw their faces. Dana stood in a beige trench coat, clutching her phone like a badge of authority. Thomas stood next to her, shoulders tense, eyes cast downward like a schoolboy waiting to be scolded. I didn't open the door right away. I let them knock again, and when I finally cracked it open, I didn't step back to let them in. I stood in the frame, letting the weight of the moment settle. "We just want to talk," Dana said quickly, eyes darting past me, searching for a glimpse of Levi. "This isn't a fight." Thomas nodded but still wouldn't look me in the eye. I opened the door a little wider and stepped aside. Not because I wanted to, but because I wanted them to see the space they no longer had power in. They walked in like it was still their world. Sat down at my kitchen table, a table too small for negotiations, too intimate for manipulation. Dana crossed her legs and gave me a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We're worried," she began, "about Levi, about how this all looks." I raised an eyebrow. "How it looks to who?" She hesitated. "The school, the neighbors, child services. He's 17. People are asking questions." I stayed standing. The distance felt necessary. And whose idea was it to throw his things into the hallway? Her expression faltered just for a moment. Thomas shifted in his seat. "He was acting out," he mumbled. "He called us abusive. In front of everyone, you know how that sounds." "It sounds like he was telling the truth," I said, my voice calm. "He was scared you didn't like that." Dana sat up straighter. "You don't know what it's like, raising 2 kids, managing bills. Dealing with a sister who never leaves and a mother-in-law." I finished the sentence for her. "A mother-in-law you wanted out from the start." She didn't deny it, she didn't even blink. Thomas finally looked at me. "Is he okay?" he asked. "He hasn't answered any of our calls." "He's safe," I replied. "And no, he doesn't want to come back." Dana scoffed. "He's a child, he doesn't get to decide everything." "He's not deciding everything," I said. "He's deciding what he can no longer tolerate. There's a difference." She leaned forward. "So what? You think you can just keep him here? You live in a shoebox." I didn't flinch. Better a shoebox full of peace than a house full of poison. The silence that followed was thick and awkward. They weren't used to hearing me speak with this kind of certainty. I wasn't used to it either. Thomas glanced at Dana, then back at me. "What do you want?" he asked. "Are you going to keep him just like that?" "Yes," I said, "unless Levi tells me otherwise." Dana's voice rose. "You don't have custody, you don't have rights. We were trying to make this civil. I walked to the door and opened it. The air outside rushed in, cold, unapologetic. If you were trying to be civil, I said, you wouldn't have waited until your lies started to unravel before showing up. They didn't move. He's not your shield, not your cleanup crew. He's a boy who broke the rules of your performance, and now you're embarrassed. Dana clenched her jaw but said nothing. If he wants to talk to you, he'll let you know, I finished. Until then, don't come back. They stood slowly. Dana looked like she wanted to say more, but for once she didn't. Thomas gave me one small nod before turning to follow her out. I locked the door behind them. A few minutes later, Levi stepped out of the bathroom. He didn't ask who it was. He didn't look anxious or curious. He just looked at me and said, "Did you tell them?" I nodded. Everything they needed to hear. He went back to brushing his teeth. That night we made grilled cheese and watched a comedy on mute. Neither of us laughed much, but it didn't matter. It was quiet. It was ours. And that was enough. The next morning, I took my grocery bag and walked to the legal aid center a few blocks away. Sat on a plastic chair in the waiting room while Levi stayed home and did his schoolwork at our kitchen table. When my name was finally called, I met with a woman named Miss Harlow. Sharp eyes, no-nonsense tone, but kind. She asked questions I hadn't let myself answer in full sentences before. Had he been abandoned, denied food? Emotionally harmed? I told her the truth, all of it, no dramatics, just facts. I showed her the call logs, the voicemails, the messages, even the social media post Maddie had written the night I left, joking about how they'd finally pushed the parasite out. Miss Harlow didn't flinch. She tapped her pen quickly on the desk. "You're not his legal guardian," she said, "but based on what you've shown me, we can file for emergency temporary custody." I didn't know how to respond. "Will it work?" "That's up to the judge," she said, "but you're on solid ground." I walked home a little taller than I had in weeks. When I opened the door, Levi was still at the table, pencil in hand, concentration deep. He looked up and smiled, not wide but enough. I told him what I'd done, that we'd taken the first step toward making it legal. He nodded. "You don't have to fight them," he said quietly. "I'm not going back there anyway." "I'm not fighting them for them," I told him. "I'm doing this so no one can take you from where you're finally safe." And when he reached for another slice of toast, I realized something. This wasn't about escape anymore. This was about building something worth staying for. The week leading up to the hearing moved slower than I imagined time could. Every day felt like it was holding its breath, waiting. I filled the hours with small tasks that didn't need to be done, rearranging the pantry, folding the same blanket twice, writing grocery lists I never used. Levi helped in his quiet way, always nearby but never needing to talk much. He started sleeping better. The dark circles under his eyes began to soften. He laughed sometimes at small things. When I dropped a spoon into the sink and jumped like it was a bomb, he smiled. Not because it was funny, but because it was familiar. He understood that kind of jump. One night he showed me a drawing he'd done for school, just pencil on paper, our little apartment, the light coming in through the window, 2 chairs at the table, not one. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't cry, but I kept that drawing under my pillow for days. When the hearing finally came, it didn't look the way I expected. No dramatic speeches, no gavel slamming. Just a room with fluorescent lights, a judge in glasses, and too many chairs. Dana was there, not Thomas. Her lawyer spoke more than she did. They tried to argue that I had manipulated Levi, that I had poisoned him against them. But the evidence sat quietly on the judge's desk, the voicemails, the texts, the school counselor's letter, the witness statements from people who'd seen Levi leave with nothing but a duffel bag. The judge didn't raise his voice. He didn't say much. He just read, paused, looked at Levi, then at me, then back at Dana. And when he signed the paper and slid it across the table, it didn't feel triumphant. It felt like someone had taken a weight off both our backs. Temporary custody granted. No cheers, no tears, just the quiet sound of breath finally being released. When we walked out of the building, I held Levi's hand. He didn't let go. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. That night, we didn't celebrate. We made macaroni and cheese with real butter, not the powdered kind, and we sat on the floor to eat because we still didn't have a proper table. But it didn't matter. We were home. We were safe. And for the first time since I walked out of that house, no one had the power to take that away from us. Days passed, then weeks, and something strange began to happen. The phone stopped ringing. No calls, no texts, not from Dana, not from Thomas, not even from Simone. At first, I thought it was the calm before the storm, that they were planning something, some legal pushback, some performance for another courtroom. But nothing came. Eventually, I realized the truth. They weren't regrouping. They weren't strategizing. They were moving on because they hadn't lost Levi by accident. They had let him go the moment he stopped being useful. The moment he became a witness instead of a buffer. They never wanted him back. They just didn't want to be seen for who they were. That realization hurt more than I expected. Not for myself, but for him. Because I saw the way Levi still checked his phone every morning just once before placing it back on the nightstand. I saw the way his face didn't change when there was nothing new. And I saw how he pretended it didn't matter. We didn't talk about them anymore. Not directly. But sometimes when he made a sandwich and sliced it too perfectly, I knew it was because he used to get yelled at for making crumbs. And when he stayed up too late drawing by the window, I knew it was because silence in that house only existed at night. We developed rhythms. I cooked breakfast every morning, even if he didn't wake up until noon. He did his schoolwork on the couch while I knitted beside him. He played the same 3 songs on repeat. I watered a fake plant by the window, still forgetting it wasn't real. It was small, uneventful, quiet. And it was the best life I'd had in years. One afternoon, as we sat by the window with mugs of tea going cold in our hands, Levi asked me if I ever thought I'd go back. He didn't say their names. He didn't need to. I knew who he meant: the house, the silence, the people who used it like a weapon. I looked at him for a long moment, not because I didn't know the answer, but because it meant something that he asked. He wasn't just curious. He was searching for signs of whether he should feel guilty for not missing them. I told him the truth. I didn't leave because they kicked me out, I said quietly. I left because I finally understood that they were never going to stop trying to convince me I didn't matter. And I couldn't keep proving them right by staying. He didn't speak, just nodded like something inside him had finally settled. That was the thing no one had ever taught us, that love, real love, doesn't demand silence. It doesn't require shrinking, and it doesn't make you the villain just because you finally said no. Our apartment was still small. The paint still peeled near the corners, the lock still stuck. The bed still creaked, the walls were still thin. But now there was life here. There were drawings taped to the fridge, grocery lists written in 2 different handwritings, a shared understanding that we didn't have to earn each other's presence. Sometimes we laughed, not every day, not for long. But it was real when it came. Other times we were just 2 people sharing a space, quietly healing on our own timelines. I learned to stop filling silences with explanations. He learned that he didn't have to apologize for taking up space. At night, I'd hear him turning pages of a book or softly humming a song he'd forgotten he liked. I stopped waiting for the phone to ring. It didn't anymore. And if it did, I knew I didn't have to pick it up. Weeks turned into months. I got used to the routine, the quiet kind of routine that doesn't chain you but steadies you. We went grocery shopping together. Sometimes he picked out things I didn't recognize, snacks with names I couldn't pronounce. I bought them anyway. He never asked me to, but I could tell it mattered that he didn't have to explain. One morning, I found a note he'd left on the kitchen counter. No reason, no occasion, just a few words on a scrap of paper. You always made it feel like I wasn't broken. I read it 3 times before folding it into my coat pocket like it was something sacred. I don't know what the future holds. I'm not naive. I know temporary custody is just that, temporary, but I also know that some things don't need papers to be real. He's here. He chooses to be here, and I choose him back. Every single day, I think about that night sometimes, the night I left that house. How the air outside felt sharp and wet. How my fingers trembled as I zipped my bag. How I felt more shame than anger, like I had failed somehow. Failed as a mother, as a grandmother, as a person who had tried to hold everything together for so long. But now I understand. I didn't fail, I survived. I adapted. I protected the one person who had always seen me not as a burden or a backup plan, but as someone worthy of being loved without conditions. They said I ruined their lives, screamed it like it was gospel, like their hurt was my doing. But the truth, I didn't ruin anything. I just stopped lying for them. I stopped covering for the silence. I stopped shrinking to fit in spaces that never made room for me. I walked away from the version of myself they needed me to be: quiet, compliant, forgettable. And when I left, I didn't just leave alone. I took their scapegoat with me. Now he's just a boy doing homework at a kitchen table with 2 chairs, and I'm just a woman making tea in a quiet room, finally unafraid of her own voice. We're not what they called us. We're what we built together, and that's the life they never